I'm excited to bring you the From Issue to Action A3 Problem Solving in 1 hour. Lisa Peterson from the Fisheries Office of Science and Technology is going to kick us off today, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you very much, Katie. It's great to be here. I want to start by saying a big thank you to the Central Library and Katie for hosting this seminar. Every time I work with the NOAA Central Library on a seminar, it's always so easy and so professional, so it's very much appreciated. As mentioned, my name is Lisa Peterson, and I am currently the Acting Fisheries Information System, or FIS, Program Director, and I'm going to be kicking off this seminar before handing it over to my co-presenter, Jen Cudney, who is with the Office of Sustainable Fisheries Atlantic Highly Migratory Species Program. We are also joined today by Lucas Johansson, kind of in the background, and he is from the Office of Science and Technology Recreational Fishery Statistics Division, and he really led the development of this seminar that we are going to be going through with you all today. So the three of us are here as part of the FIS Quality Management and Continuous Improvement Professional Specialty Group, which I'm going to tell you more about in a moment. But today we're going to be introducing you to some quality management and continuous improvement tools and approaches, all within the framework of a A3 problem solving technique. So I'm going to stop my camera here so I don't block any of the slides. So we're really hoping today you're going to walk away from this seminar with a better understanding of quality management and continuous improvement principles, concepts, and tools, and the ability and hopefully interest in applying A3 to your own projects. But first, who are we? I mentioned the FIS program and the Quality Management and Continuous Improvement Professional Specialty Group, or the QMCI PSG. We do love acronyms. But FIS is a state, regional, federal partnership that is working to improve fisheries dependent data, basically by bringing folks together across all of our silos to share expertise, best practices, lessons learned, and also fund innovative projects. But a core pillar of this program are our communities of practice, or our PSGs, that we convene around specific topic areas. One of those groups that you're hearing from today is the QMCI PSG. So this group is working to instill an agency-wide culture of continuous improvement to enhance data processes through a suite of quality management and continuous improvement practices. We have members from across fisheries as well as our Fishery Information Network, or FIN, partners. So if you find this seminar helpful, I'm going to encourage you to check out the QMCI PSG webpage that we will have a link to at the end of this presentation. But if you go to the NOAA Fisheries website and just search quality management, you should see our webpage pop up. And I'll also encourage you to reach out to the team, which will have an email address here for you, again, closer to the end of the presentation, or even your local representative if you are in fisheries or one of our FINs. So this team is working to instill QMCI across NOAA and our partners, but some of you may still be wondering what QMCI is. When we talk about quality management and quality data products, we're not talking about data quality. That's a separate thing. So QM itself encompasses a number of principles, strategies, and tools that, when applied to all levels of a data program throughout all stages of the data lifecycle, lead us to quality data products. So in the world of fisheries, we focus on quality management as a means of ensuring high quality data products. We can't expect to just arrive at having a high quality data product instantaneously. It takes a lot of work by an organization and its partners, and the likelihood of positive outcomes are really increased by investing into these quality management processes upfront and throughout all of the life cycle of our data. So how do we get to those quality data products? Well, we start with QMCI principles. These principles are core aspects of QMCI that are necessary to have as a foundation for a culture of QMCI and include things like leadership buy-in, organizational-wide commitments, and a focus on stakeholder needs. These core principles feed the core strategies, such as training, documentation, and standards used to build that culture of quality. Both of these principles and strategies then feed into the use of tools, which are used to put QM into practice. And finally, all three of these feed into the generation of quality data products. So it's important to note that these steps are interrelated, and you really can't have an effective quality management program without all four of these things. So, for example, it's great to have your staff use QM tools to inform data products, but if there's not an organizational commitment or leadership support, you may find that it's tough to implement the needed changes that you've identified through the use of those quality management tools. So, next, we wanted to share with you a common principle that is used in QMCI, and this is the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, or PDCA. And so we wanted to share this because this is really the main thesis of QMCI and can be helpful for understanding it. So many of the discrete tools that we use when we're teaching QMCI are derived from or utilize one or really multiple steps of this cycle. So, what is it? So, first, we plan out what we're going to do before we begin. Then, we implement our plans to develop a product or a project. Then, we evaluate what worked and what didn't. And finally, we act on those findings to keep doing what we did right and make any corrections that are needed. And then the cycle starts all over again as we plan to take our next steps. So, this tool can be applied to virtually any project, product, or your own life. So, for instance, we use this PDCA cycle for this presentation. We've given this presentation actually a number of times, and we have always checked how it went based on the reaction of the audience and a survey that we'll probably send out at the end of this as well. And then we acted on that feedback the next time we met, updated that presentation, planned how we'd make improvements, and then developed the current iteration of this presentation. And we'll continue doing that following this seminar. So for the rest of this training, you're going to see these PDCA principles throughout the A3 problem solving approach. So now that hopefully you have at least a basic understanding of QMCI, let's get into A3 problem solving. So I wanted to note that as we move through the A3, we're also going to be introducing you to some specific tools that can be integrated within the A3 tool that you can also apply to other aspects of your work. That's partly why we love the A3 problem solving tool, is that it's a really good way to introduce folks to a variety of tools, all within a similar framework, but that can be used in other scenarios that you might face on the job or again in your life. But what exactly is A3 problem solving? Well, as many of you probably know, A3 is the name of a standard paper size. It's approximately an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. And the concept behind the A3 is to distill all relevant project or problem information into a concise, clear storyboard that fits on a single, slightly large page of paper. So the goal is to streamline the report so that it focuses only on the problem, the current state, and its solution, and nothing else. And this provides a simple, standardized approach for a team to capture data and information and visually communicate that information and those ideas. And the idea is that if you can't fit everything onto that one A3 size paper, then your problem is probably too big and needs to be broken down into smaller parts. And if you're interested in going down a rabbit hole on the history behind this, this approach was developed by Toyota as part of their lean manufacturing production process. So why would you use an A3? As most of you have probably experienced in your work, problems that arise in organizations or projects are often addressed in superficial ways. So this is often referred to as first order problem solving, where we either work around a problem or we apply a patch to accomplish our immediate objective, but we are not actually addressing the root cause of the problem in order to prevent it from reoccurring. So if you're in the data management realm, this often manifests itself as technical debt, which ultimately we do have to pay for in one way or another. So the A3 approach, however, addresses this issue by providing a standardized method for problem solving and planning. So you would use this method to identify and describe the real problem, comprehensively define your current state, and again, drill down into that root cause of the problem. You also define what your ideal future state is after you solve the problem. and then you can quantify that gap between where you're currently at and your ideal future state. And based on that, you can identify an implementation plan to close that gap. And over all of this, you're using the PDCA cycle to continuously improve the process. The A3 process also provides a good mechanism to facilitate team-based problem solving. So working collectively builds buy-in and ownership among the team members, and the A3 problem-solving framework gives you a way to do that. And because this is all being documented in a clear, concise report, it allows the planning, the process, and any lessons learned to be reviewed by different interested parties, like your boss or higher level management, other teams within your agency, and even your stakeholders and your customers if you have those. And the documentation this provides also builds a knowledge base, so you're not relying on institutional knowledge. And being able to share that information helps to foster an organization wide culture of continuous improvement, which ultimately is the goal of quality management. So, when would you use this approach? So, I would argue that A3 can be used in a lot of different situations. It's a very versatile tool, but sometimes it really is the perfect tool for the situation. And one of those situations would be when the solution to your problem is not known. As I mentioned, using a root cause analysis to drill down to the core of the issue can save you a lot of time and resources down the road. But on the other hand, if you truly know the solution, or if you've already done a root cause analysis, you may not need to do a full A3. Also, as we discussed, the A3 provides a good approach for team-based problem solving and visually communicating a problem or a process if that is needed. A3s in general are good for problems that require analysis and planning, but that are not too highly complex. Again, we're trying to fit all of this on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. So if the problem is really complex or multifaceted and requires more than that, you may want to explore other tools, or you can try to break the problem up into multiple related A3s, where each A3 addresses a smaller problem that contributes to the whole. And also, we refer to this as A3 problem solving, but it's not only about problems. It can also be used for just strategic planning to get from your current state to an ideal future state from an organization or agency perspective and identify the actions that need to be taken to get there. It also can be useful for looking at systems. So, an analysis from a systems wide perspective to look at all the interconnected components and how they interact is a way to use an A3. And again, with the objective of achieving that ideal future state of a system. So, for example, if you're familiar with things like value stream mapping, system design, and team planning, all of those could be used to put together an A3 on your system. A3s can also be used for process improvement. So, this is kind of looking lower level, day to day processes, methods, and problem solving. So, there's some identified problem that you or your team is facing, and you want to get to the root cause, and A3 is a way to do that. So, one thing I do want to emphasize is that the form itself is not the solution. It's really the thinking and the process of putting it together that makes A3 a powerful tool. So, the example of the A3 report that we are introducing today is not the only format. There are different versions of the form based on your scope, based on need. There's no one A3 form that does it all. So you really need to make it fit based on your requirements and objectives. So you would typically fill out the A3 sections sequentially going from the upper left corner down, and this is kind of your planning half of the A3, and then moving to the upper right-hand corner and down. And this you'll see is your do, check, act portion of the A3. And also, because you're trying to include a lot of background information, it's often best to use graphics, such as images, charts, or sketches whenever possible, because these tend to convey information more concisely than text. But obviously, you can also just use words. If you can't describe the situation with a drawing or a sketch or a graph or a chart or a diagram or something visual, I often find myself using words quite a bit. But we just wanted to highlight that it would be good to use those visual options as well. So this is just a reiteration of the typical sections of that A3. Again, you may see different formats of this, but generally the A3 will include all of these in some form. So you'll have a title and a header, you'll have a background, which may also be called a business case or a reason or the need or the issue. You'll have your current state as well as a problem analysis, which could include that root cause analysis I referred to earlier. And then as you move over to the right column, you'll have your future state or your target condition. You'll have your implementation plan of how to get to that future state. And then you'll have your metrics, your results, and any follow-up you want to have in this bottom right-hand box. So you may be able to see this yourself, but tying this back to the plan, do, checked, act cycle, you can see that a typical A3 has this PDCA ingrained throughout the process. So A3 reports, again, typically read from the top left down and the top right down. And if you notice, the left-hand describes the program or the problem and why it is happening. So that's your current state as well as the root cause of your issue. So that, along with the future state, tends to be the most time-intensive part of this, and this is really your planning part of the plan, do, check, act cycle within the A3. And then the right side, you have the do portion of your A3, which is your implementation plan. How are we going to get to that ideal future state? And then finally, you have your check and your act in the form of metrics or results or follow-up, where you do a check to confirm the effects of your changes and an act to revise your approach based on the results. So the rest of the seminar is going to describe each of these sections and potential approaches for filling them out. This is an example of a completed A3. We just wanted to quickly show this and point out the heavy use of visuals. And you can also see other quality management tools incorporated into this process, such as flowcharts, checklists, measures and metrics, as well as some more complicated QMCI tools like fishbone diagrams. But you can see how clearly and simply this method displays information that can be shared throughout a team or an organization or between projects. So as we step through the A3 process today, I wanted to mention that we're going to be following one example that we came up with throughout the rest of the presentation. So the overarching hypothetical problem that Jen and I are going to be addressing is how to integrate a new data stream into an existing database. So when you start your A3, the first sections are the overview with the header and the background. So these sections contain basic information about the project, organization, or the team. Pretty straightforward, basic stuff, but we wanted to highlight this because at this point you should be considering that you may be doing many of these or you may be sharing these with people unfamiliar with your team or with your project. And so you're going to want to have a way to identify them by area or team. Then you also have a background section, which provides context and a description of all pertinent information needed to understand the scope of the problem or issue. So this can include background information such as when and where the problem was identified, its impact on the organization or stakeholders, and just any other historical information that's relevant. It should also describe the purpose or reasons why it's important to address this issue. So why are we doing this? And it's important to remember here to really focus on the issue or the problem. This is not where you start trying to figure out the solution. This is just identifying what it is we're trying to solve. So it's often helpful to include a clear, focused, standalone statement that defines the problem in this background section. So for this example, we would include basic information about the project in the header. And again, this will be a way for someone else who picks up this A3 to see who's responsible for it, when it was created, what team is working on this project, where that team is located, and also kind of just what is the project about. In our background, we would describe the problem or the project. So in this case, again, with our hypothetical example, Jen and I's office has received a sudden influx of funds and has been challenged to quickly respond to address a strategic initiative using a new data stream. So we know where the data is coming from, but we're facing the challenge of integrating that data stream into our existing database. So now that I've done the introduction and the easy stuff, I'm going to hand it over to Jen to get into the real meat of the A3 problem-solving process.
Thanks, Lisa. So let's move to the next slide. So we are now moving on to the current state section of the A3. And before the problem can be properly addressed, we have to have a comprehensive understanding of that situation. So as the name implies, what we're trying to do here is describe the current state or the conditions that are related to the problem or the issues. This section provides a detailed analysis of the existing situation, including any relevant data, observations, and metrics or other information that might help characterize the problem. This is where it can be very helpful to create visuals such as flowcharts, graphs, or sketches that are going to show data or workflows, trends, or other visualizations to just help a viewer really understand what is happening and to be able to answer other questions such as what is influencing the process, how is the problem manifesting, and what is the magnitude of the problem. This section is really intended to set the baseline for understanding our situation before any interventions are made. An important point here is to not think about solutions at this stage. Sometimes we get very excited about the problem and trying to dissect it, and we want to jump immediately to how do we solve it. But you have to understand your baseline first. If you don't, you won't be able to effectively evaluate your countermeasures because you have nothing to measure it against. Next slide. So there are several tools that we can use to help analyze our current state and identify it. We'll start here with some examples that can help you with that. Oh, I think we lost our presentation, did we? All right, thank you. Okay, so we have a couple of tools that are listed that we think make a great starting point for identifying your current state. And the results that you'll get from these can flow into the next sections of the A3 as well. So the work that you do here really ripples throughout the discussions and analyses that you'll do later when you work on your other parts of the A3. The first tool that we suggest considering is called an environmental scan. This can be done with a tool called a PESTLE. So this is an acronym. It does stand for political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors. So the focus of a PESTLE analysis is to review, identify, and analyze the existing sources and factors that could impact an organization, team, or a project. So this is really focused on identifying and understanding the external drivers and things that can influence what it is that you're working on. So things like the political are going to deal with administrative changes. Economic deals with funding, sociocultural, things that affect your work environment, technological, cloud platforms, for example. Environmental can be any number of different external environmental issues that are affecting your problem or issue. And legal could be things like data sharing policies or other things that affect how we do our day-to-day work. You want to brainstorm or identify in these categories as you work through this tool. Another tool known as a SWOT analysis is a planning tool that is used to identify and evaluate the internal strengths and weaknesses of an organization or team, as well as the opportunities and threats that it faces. So environmental scan tends to be looking at the external forces. SWOT analysis can look at both the internal and external forces. So it really comes down to the questions that you want to ask. I have seen both of these used very effectively together. SWOT analyses can be used in an A3 to identify potential solutions by leveraging internal strengths and weaknesses, while at the same time addressing weaknesses and mitigating threats. So some things to ask ourselves when we're trying to brainstorm strengths might be, what do we do well? What unique resources do we have? Do we have interesting or wonderful capabilities and experiences that we can leverage? Do we have a funding surplus? Weaknesses might be things like gaps in our capabilities. What complaints have we received? Are we facing a limited funding or a budget scenario? Opportunities, again, are our external things to consider. What trends can we take advantage of? Where do we have stakeholder and customer buy-in? What are the trends that we should be aware of in the industry? What are some new technologies or new funding opportunities that are happening? Threats are also external and can relate to things such as an economic downturn, political impacts such as changes in political administrations or policies, negative perceptions from stakeholders or customers. Environmental impacts can also be considered a threat, loss of key staff turnover, and maybe reliance on third parties. So again, these two tools are very useful for strategic planning as well, because you also want to understand your current state there. Next slide. So coming back to our scenario of receiving a sudden influx of funds and being challenged to address incorporating a new data stream, we have examples of hypothetical brainstorm strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats here. So in this example, we've got expertise, existing database structure, and dedicated coordinators identified as strengths. The classic being overcommitted, workload issues, data security, data silos as weaknesses, opportunities being leadership recognition, maybe new technology and streamlining, improved management practices, and external data requests as opportunities. And then threats, of course, being cybersecurity related to data breaches, operations support, funding is always a concern, and having ill-defined strategic goals. So these are just some examples, but certainly these are things that could come up when you do your own brainstorming. Next slide. All right. So the next section is the problem analysis section. And at this point in the process, we want to start analyzing the information that we've gathered. So here we are asking ourselves a couple of questions. Does everybody understand the process? Does everybody agree on the decision points or what that process is? Are there any choke points or bottlenecks? Are there any transitions? At what point do the processes change hands? So anytime you have this sort of transition in a process flow, you're going to have potential risks for delay or errors or anything where you're handing off control of a process from one person or office or entity to another. So it is important to be able to identify where that's happening so that you can carefully scrutinize those steps in your process. Here we're trying to get to the root cause of the problem. There are a number of different problem-solving tools. So next slide. And here is our list of just a few problem-solving tools that you could consider using. So there are a lot of them. These tools generally involve some type of brainstorming, organizing, and visualizing discussion points. So you will have to sit down, you will have to possibly write stuff down on sticky notes or other ways to capture data and ideas, and then look at them. Take a step back, look at the information that you've gathered. The tool selected will depend on the exact nature of your question and your situation. If your goal is to develop a large number of solutions, you could use some of the brainstorming techniques or affinity diagramming. If you want to understand root causes, you might pick something like 5 whys or fishbone diagrams. If you want to understand a current or future process, then you might pick a flow chart or a value stream map. Today, we're going to use a flow chart to help us look at our example process. A flow chart is a way to visually map a process or a system flow. They can be used to document, understand, analyze, and communicate the flow and sequence of a process, the people involved, the time involved, and the decision points that are happening throughout a process. Flowcharts are a really excellent tool to use if you want documentation. You want to know when a process is being developed or if it's already being used. If you want to understand the steps in a process and what is involved in each step. And if you want to understand when the process moves from one actor or function to another. We can also use this to examine the process to identify areas of improvement. It's an excellent communication tool because, again, we tend to get team members together to work on this. So it's an opportunity for everybody to think about what's happening and also to think about ways to communicate this process to others. And it's also an opportunity to identify gaps or areas for improvement. One benefit of flowcharts is that they are pretty easily adaptable to a number of different purposes and processes. Next slide. All right. Going back to our example problem where we want to gain a better understanding, going back to our example problem, we want to gain a better understanding of it and any root causes of issues that through the creation of this flowchart. So again, we're going to start asking ourselves some questions to try and visually represent what is going on with our process. It's pretty important to identify your start and end points. So you might start with questions such as, where does our process start? In this case, the data comes in from the original source. Where does it stop? Over on the right, we have full integration into a production database. And then we have to identify what are the major steps, tasks, and decision points in between your start point and your end point. In this example, you might consider questions such as, who are the end users of the data in the new database? Do we have direct access to the data source? Is there a communications channel open with the data providers? Does the current structure of the database need to be updated to accommodate the new data streams? Are we using all of the data or are we subsetting it? Will the data need to be transformed to integrate with the existing database? So as you work through these questions and you start to figure out the different steps in your process, you can use different symbology to represent parts of your flowchart. So in this example, we have steps represented as boxes. We have sort of a rounded or an oval, more oval-shaped box for our start and our end points. And we have decision points represented as diamonds with little yes, no arrows coming out. So the flow chart is going to have points where you have a sort of binary choice where you're going to pick either a yes or a no. If then, you're going to go through the different steps under these different decision points. So you want to make sure as you're going through this that you're paying attention to discrepancies and understanding among your team members. You're looking and considering those choke points and bottlenecks that we mentioned and your communication needs or potential breakdowns. So again, anytime we're considering a situation where you have a process flowing from one team to the next, you have the potential for more communication needs and you have to keep an eye out for potential breakdowns in that communication. We're also looking for places where there could be long time delays. This is going to happen and it will have downstream effects if that occurs. So we start with where the data currently sits and end where we have the data where we want it. Those key processes are backing up the existing database and locating the metadata. Key decision points are, is the data formatted correctly? And does the database structure need to be updated? And how much data will need to be transformed for integration? Next slide. So once we figure out our current state and our problem analysis, then we're going to look at our future state. This is really the target conditions for our process or our problem. Where do we want to be? What do we really want? What does that look like? What does our ideal future state look like? And how do we get there? This is also a point where we're thinking about our countermeasures to specific issues. Oops, we lost our presentation again. Thank you. As we're working through this identification of the future state, we do want to keep our stakeholders in mind, and we also want to make sure that we're not prioritizing or optimizing one area and deprioritizing or sub-optimizing another. So let's look at an example. Next slide. One of the future state tools that I really enjoy working with is called an affinity diagram. It is a visual tool that helps organize information from a brainstorming session and discover embedded patterns by sorting and clustering information into relationships. So essentially, everybody on your team is asked to brainstorm and capture as many ideas as they can around a target question or a problem. So sometimes we'll do questions such as envision your ideal future state. What does it look like? Who can best help improve and add data streams? What end products can be improved? Some of these types of questions that have who and what tend to work better than why questions. Once all of the ideas are on the wall or the board, the next step is to group similar ideas, allowing the team to identify overarching categories. So we're taking all of the individual labels. So in this case, pretend little yellow squares are sticky notes. Each one has an idea on it. As we're doing this, it's very important to remember that these sticky notes are capturing data. And so you want that data to be meaningful when you look at this in 5 years. So we do tend to recommend that folks follow the will I be able to know what this means in 5 years prompt. It's something that we do remind the groups that we work with in facilitation. Make sure that your idea is very clearly written on the sticky note. So we take these, capture that information, usually up on a wall, and then we have the groups look at these ideas and start to organize them. The groupings are labeled, and then each member of a team will vote on the groups that they think are the most important. And then we rank those groups based on priority. So this is a very good tool to use when you're gathering information about a defined problem, when you're trying to build that common understanding of a problem and understand the causes. It's well suited for complicated or multifaceted situations, non-technical problems. Again, we want to try to be short and sweet with those sticky notes. So if you have a highly complicated issue or a technical problem, sometimes it's a little difficult to capture an extreme amount of detail on these. And then also problems involving disparate interests and perspectives may or may not be the best options for this technique, but there are others that we could consider. Materials that are required here include sticky notes and pens, maybe a whiteboard and markers, and a flip chart. So we find that some of the strengths of this tool are that depending on how you facilitate this, it gives everyone an equal voice. When everybody is brainstorming on sticky notes, there is not one sticky note that is going to stand out among the other ones. Sometimes it's not as simple when you have people just conversing and having ideas in a discussion. It's also relatively simple. Next slide. So now we want to imagine we have successfully used extra funding to integrate a new data stream into our existing database. And we've answered the following questions. What does this look like? How did we get there? And what is our ideal future state? We kept in mind the elements that we identified during our problem analysis and came up with this result. We had main groupings as improving data procedures, internal and external coordination, clear and comprehensive documentation, and improved outcomes. As you go through that grouping process, sometimes you'll find redundant sticky notes. Sometimes you'll find better ways to phrase things. There are ways to deal with that and consolidate the ideas down. So this is a little bit of an iterative exercise, but it can really help you identify these major themes that are going to emerge from it. Next slide. So now that we know what our future state looks like, we need to figure out how to get there. The implementation plan, which is what we're going to work on next, will identify what steps it takes to realize the improvements that were outlined under the future state. So that includes identifying what changes need to be made, where we might want to identify the steps and prioritize tasks. We can identify who is responsible for different steps in the process. So this is where we're identifying the lead and the teams for making the work happen. This is a point where we would make a timeline for our process. And we would hopefully be able to identify our final results, our deliverables, and identify when they can be expected to be delivered. You'll also need to determine how to keep track of your progress. Generally, this is done through measures and/or metrics. Next slide. All right. So here is an example implementation plan that very clearly identifies on the left your timeline by quarters, your deliverables and objectives in the middle column, and who is responsible for it. Next slide. So we've reached the final section of our A3. This is going to be the results, the metrics, the follow-up, the cost benefits. So these are the outcomes, the things that we are producing through this whole problem analysis. In this section, we're looking at our progress, the benefits, and basically trying to determine if we've achieved our goals and what we do through tools such as, I mentioned, measures and metrics. We'll ask, do the measured results match the predicted results? We want to make sure to consider the total long-term impacts on the organization, including the analysis of cost to benefit. These measures and metrics can be used to communicate results and lessons learned. Next slide. So I want to just provide a quick definition. When we're talking about a metric, get that back. Thank you very much. All right. So when we're talking about measures, usually this is a data point, a number. And a metric really contextualizes that number. We want to pick metrics that are quantifiable information and data that are used to assess progress, track performance, and evaluate the achievement of goals. So metrics are really going to allow you to strategize and communicate your outcomes. They can be used to motivate and to manage. You should always remember to try to be smart when you're creating your metrics. So yes, we're coming back to the SMART goals of, are they specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound? And when you're developing your metrics, you want to make sure that you're really specific in how you're describing them. So are we identifying the name and a description, an owner? Do we have a unit of measure? Do we have a goal? How often we're collecting it or the frequency of measuring? Do we have data sources identified? Our target level? What is our objective here with having this metric? Things to avoid. We don't want to have too many metrics. We want to make sure we have metrics that we can actually measure. We're only measuring things. You want to avoid measuring only things that you can count. You want to make sure that you have an owner. And you want to make sure that you're not trying to measure something you have no control over. That will not do you any good. Next slide. So this is an example of a measures and metrics table where we very clearly identify who our owners are, our unit of measure, the goals that are that the metric supports, frequency, data source, and target level. And you can set this up however is most relevant to you, but tracking all of this really does give you a comprehensive sense for where you're going to go and how you're going to assess whether you have reached your target. Next slide. All right. So does everybody remember PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act? Now it's time to look back at our metrics and evaluate where we are in achieving our goals. Did the solution take you from your current state to the future state? If not, reevaluate. This is a continuous process. So sometimes we pick metrics only to find that they're not necessarily doing what we think they were going to do in the first place. That's okay because this is a cycle of continuous improvement and we can learn from that. We want to think about what it is that we've learned through this process, identify follow-up actions, and update. Next slide. Great. Congratulations. We have walked you through how to fill out all of the sections of an A3 project planning tool. So you have leveled up your game with the A3 skill set. We are happy to take any questions that you have. I also, let's see, next slide. I want to point out that there are some resources available for you. All of the principles and tools that we've discussed and other case studies demonstrating where they've been used. Contact information for our quality management professional specialty group members and more is available on the QMCI website. So if you click on that, or if you write down that webpage or you Google search NOAA Fisheries, QMCI, PSG, you should be able to find us. We do have, I'm going to pause, I guess, for questions, unless we want to there's a post-training survey that you'll be able to access, which is on the next slide. But
Let's save that for after the
yeah,
Q&A.
let's save that for after the Q&A then. All right, I am done.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. This was highly educational, and we are going to move into the Q&A portion of the seminar today. So I'm going to flip it back to the slide deck and open it up for questions. Reminder that the Q&A panel is open, so if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A and not in the chat. And we'll get to those. So I'm going to hop back to the slides and see if Lisa and Jennifer want to come on camera, maybe stop sharing their screen and come on camera, and we can go through those questions. Awesome. So for our first question, let's get those on the screen. Okay, so our first one is for pestle and SWOT. Can you just put in a few words that indicate an issue? Do we need to write things out in complete sentences?
I think that's a good question. And when we've done this as a group, so we put all of these tools into practice within our PSG, within our small group where we're building our internal capacity. And when we're actually doing the activity up on a wall or on a screen, we'll use shorter words, but we also take notes too. So there are ways that you can capture. It's a little bit of a balancing act where, again, you want to remember what a little word or two means 5 years from now when you go back and look at your pestle and your SWOT. But you can generally be succinct, I think. Lisa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Jen. It's good to be succinct, but you do want to make sure find that balance of having it be understood. I don't think you need to worry about complete sentences, and it also helps to kind of keep the focus on the critical components. So that will allow you to kind of more easily group things together, particularly if you're using something like an affinity diagram after you're doing the SWOT and the pestle.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to our next question, and they're getting detailed. Page 22 appears to show nominal process flow. Do you use symbology to indicate suspect or problematic areas of the flow?
Yes. So there are some standard symbols that we do use with flowcharting. When you're dealing with value stream mapping, it really depends on the tool because each of the tools have their own kind of guidelines for different symbols and symbology and what it is that you're actually tracking through your process. So they are going to be a little relevant to the tool that you pick. But for example, with value stream mapping, there is a way to visualize a process where you have the problem areas. That's called a Kaizen burst. And it's like a little exploding cloud that's right, Lisa? It's like an exploding cloud over the pain point. And that's how you would kind of identify it or flag it as a place to look.
Awesome. And I think probably the question that's on everyone's mind, are we going to get this very lovely slide deck? So I believe, yes, you will get this slide deck.
Yes, definitely.
And I will note I dropped the template in the chat a little while ago. I'll just make sure I put it in there again in the chat. Um, and I hope you were able to follow along using that template as they were going through. But I've run out of questions, so I'm going to take this question off and see, maybe give people another 30 seconds to type out their thoughts. And they didn't even need 30 seconds. Okay, our next question. Thank you very much for this presentation, Lisa and Jen. Do you have a preference tool for after the A3 process? An example, do you turn items into JIRA stories or do you have another post-process tool you prefer?
That is a very good question. I think for me, it definitely depends on the scope of the project or the issue that you are dealing with. So yes, I know JIRA is certainly something that I think a fair amount of people in our group and people in my office use. I know with myself in our FIS program management office, me and my colleague tend to use um, Asana to like put in that implementation plan of that we've identified. So I think it really depends on your office and the people that you are working with. I'm thinking about we've done a project management training before as well. And kind of one of the key things with that I think applies to this question is that whatever you do use, you need to commit to it. So whatever tool that you use for, tracking the implementation plan and looking at the metrics, whoever is the owner of that A3 needs to commit to using that and use that with their team and be sure that their team understands how to use that tool as well. But I know Jira and I use Asana. I imagine you could do something in Confluence as well that I know is popular in some of the fisheries offices. Jen, are there any other examples you can think of?
I mean, I think this really just depends on you want to pick something that works for your team. So I try to not prescribe or be too heavy handed in terms of the recommendations and the tools that I'm passing to the folks in my division, because I know that one of our branches prefers to operate and track issues through and progress through smart sheets. And we have another group that uses Confluence. So I would strongly recommend just checking in with your people and seeing what resonates with them. And if you have different options, then certainly you can explore what works best for your team.
Yes, and another plug for GitHub as well. I know that is popular, and I'm trying to get more into it myself, actually.
Okay, and as we were chatting, we had another question. So let's put that up. Would you agree that A3 is a variant of Agile project management? And if not, how would you differentiate the two?
So I will say I am not an IT person, and that is the realm that I hear the phrase agile project management occurring in most often. So I think that has a specific meaning to IT folks. My understanding of agile management is that you start working on something and you learn as you go and you pivot as you need to. I think it could be. I think the whole plan, do, check, act cycle. It's lean management. It lends itself very well to, it overlaps with agile management. Um, I would have to defer to my folks that do more IT work than I do, though, to be able to answer the second part of that question. So I do think it's connected, but I'm not exactly the person to walk the specific definitions of each, walk through them.
Thank you, Jennifer. Lisa, any more comments?
No, I mean I agree with Jen, but I did want to mention that it's a good question and that I'm marking it down as one that I would like to think about a little bit more. So if you want to follow up with our group, we could have a more in-depth answer for you.
Or you can trust the AI overview on Google saying that it's not the same. Okay, we have one more question coming in, and we do have a little bit more time. So if you do have the questions, keep them coming. How do you decide to split up a problem if it is too large to fit on one A3?
I think so. This is a bit subjective. Um, and I would say, Lisa and Lucas, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this too. But I think I would look at, if I was using a flow chart, if I have something that's clearly identifiable with my start and my end point, and I can clearly identify the parameters around the process that I'm trying to analyze, then I think you have the focus to be able to think through just that problem. But if you start going off on all these little tangents, or you're like, as you're going through the flow chart, you start identifying all these little things that are coming in and offshoots, and it just gets really complicated, and or your font gets really, really tiny, then you might want to take a step back and separate it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jen. I think for me, it's absolutely is subjective, but for me, I know the the way you can almost do like a pre A3 where you're thinking about, okay, this is the problem. Can I define the problem? Is probably the first thing you want to ask, because if you can't really articulate the problem in a specific way, then it might be too big and complex for an A3, and you might want to start breaking that up into more manageable chunks. But then as you're thinking about how you would describe the current state and how you would identify your ideal future state, if that leads to these like spider webs of the the diagrams of flowcharts, then I think you want to think about what are the key steps in this process that I could possibly break this out into, again, more achievable steps or uh, chunks of the problem. So doing some, I think the first step, though, as I said at the beginning, is really, can you really articulate the problem that you are trying to address or the project that you are trying to achieve?
Awesome. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. So let me pop that up on screen so everyone can see it. Have you earned the trust of fisheries leadership such that it would be apt to recommend, say, a PDCA tiger team for a problem?
That is also an excellent question because, as we said at the beginning, that is needed to truly have a successful quality management and continuous improvement program in any organization. I think we are making progress. I think we've seen in the fisheries strategic plan that focus on lean, I think really shows that the organization is starting to be, or is more articulating its commitment to using quality management approaches. And I think we're seeing that more and more. And I know that the kind of FIS model we use is from bottom up with top down support. So I know that a way to continue that is to have folks like you all and folks like Jen who are kind of embedded across the organization, bringing those quality management tools and advocating for them, and also showing how effective they can be at solving our problems and also making us more efficient and effective in our jobs. So I think we're making progress. I think we got to keep pushing. Um, but I think at this point that if you are in a spot where you want to recommend something like a A3 or a PDCA Tiger team, that I don't think it would. I think it would be um, that leadership would be open to looking at that as an option. But I can't speak for all leadership. Obviously, just that's my observation of what the trends that I've seen through time.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Jen. We are at 3 o'clock, so I'm going to let you guys show that last slide and talk about the feedback mechanism that you would want to share, and then we will wrap up.
All right.
So,
So, oh, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
sorry, Jen. So I just wanted to point out this is also the email. So the fis.qm@noaa.gov. You can send an email to that, and that will go to our PSG. And then in the slides, there'll be this link to the survey. Because again, PDCA, we try to do that here. So we'll send that out into the chat if Jen or Lucas can, or Katie can put the link to this in the chat. That would be great. And if you could fill that out, we'll keep improving this.
Also want to point out that there is a template, an A3 template for you. I believe that Katie shared it in the chat, but it will go out with the email that is sent out with this, a copy of the recording. And so if you need help finding that, please reach out to the email address. We can hook you up with another version of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. And I did put that Savory in the chat. I put the template in the chat, but you will all get a post event email that will include the survey, will include the template. It may not include the slide deck just yet, but we'll follow up via email with the slide deck. So thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Take care out there.